Hey there, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to the channel. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and essentially what filmmaking can teach us about life. This is the second part in a multi-video case study series on how I made my short film, Cuddle Buddies, that I wrote, directed, produced, and edited. So let's get into it. Each part in the series will cover a different aspect of production, from the creation of the idea all the way to the completion of the film and beyond. And I first want to preface that this is purely my creative workflow, so this might not be a one-size-fits-all for everybody. The first part in this series covered the writing phase of the script, so I highly recommend checking out that video before you get into this one. The second part will cover the pre-production and planning phase before the shoot of the film. Part 1, development. Part 2, creating a lookbook. Part 3, breaking down the script. Part 4, crowdsource funding. Part 5, starting pre-production. Part 6, casting. So what is Cuddle Buddies? The logline is as follows. Cuddle Buddies tells the story of Lucy, a single mother who works as a professional cuddler in order to support her young daughter Marina and to alleviate the loneliness not only in her clients but also in herself. Casting Marina. After casting the main 5 roles, we ended up having a separate audition just for the role of Marina, who's the 6-year-old daughter of Lucy. Perhaps one of the biggest casting challenges and sources of anxiety for me was casting the role of Marina, since the role of Marina was a very prominent character in the film, had a lot of lines, was a 6 to 8-year-old girl, and very much had to carry this film on so many levels. So I knew that if we didn't get the casting right, this film would completely fall flat. I also knew that the role of Marina is the stakes for Lucy. So if we don't really care about their relationship and we don't really feel like this is actually her daughter and we don't care about the little girl, the whole film would completely fall apart and the emotional stakes would be effectively lost. So again, Katie Ann came in the clutch and we did a first round of girls who were probably around 5 to 12 years old in the role of Marina through self-tapes. From there, we narrowed it down to about 5 different little girls to come in and audition in person at the same studio. Perhaps one of the most magical moments of this whole process was having Caitlin actually come in to read with all the different little girls in the callback to really assess the chemistry, see if they got along, and really see if they could look like a believable mother and daughter on screen.
Oh, wow. Hey, I like this. What do you want to call it?
Let's call it Koala.
And the coolest part was when we ended up seeing Lorelai audition with Caitlin, and Caitlin just gushing about how incredible this little girl was, especially right after the audition ended. Not only did we see some of the physical resemblance, the best part was that Lorelai felt and sounded like a real child. Her audition was not way too over the top or rehearsed or too Disney. It felt very grounded and very realistic, and Caitlin told us that the whole time she was listening and responding in the way that the best actors do. All of us were 100% on the same page that she was absolutely perfect for the role, and within a few days we ended up casting Lorelai as our Marina. Part 7. Locations. With the film finally cast, the next major decision we had to figure out was locations. The crucial element was to pick 1, maybe 2 locations that could double as multiple bedrooms. That way we could avoid a company move and save so much time in our shooting schedule each day of the shoot. With our budget, we could afford to shoot for 3 consecutive days, but we knew that each shooting day, we did not have time to move locations, so the location that we started the day at, we would have to end at. Our production designer, Jess Rock, and our DP, Brennan, and myself visited a slew of locations all over Los Angeles and adjacent. We put together a list of potential locations on a spreadsheet and effectively checked them out one by one throughout the course of 2 weeks. I used a Pinterest mood board and conferred with Jess to really showcase what the style of Lucy's bedroom was, along with the other clients and just every other location that we see in the film. I wanted it to feel baked in to every location that we visited. I always knew I wanted an exposed brick loft for Lucy's apartment, so once I got that image in my head, I knew that we had to find a location that already had that built in. I also use Pinterest a lot for inspiration for production design, for wardrobe, for makeup, for accessories. It's also a really helpful tool that you can create a board and collaborate with your other production heads. Jess really thought in terms of story, and it was so cool to see her initial ideas of every little thing, every little color, dressing, sheet style that was in a character's room all served a narrative purpose in the character's journey, also in the journey and the progression of the film and its symbolism. It was absolutely essential for all all of us to go visit the locations in person just to assess the logistics, the power situation, electricity, loading gear in, how much space we had, and really what the noise situation would look like around all the neighborhoods we shot in. Ultimately, we settled on 2 main locations for our shoot. One of the locations was a house in Van Nuys that we were able to use for multiple different bedrooms to stage as different client cuddle scenes in the film. The next location was a loft that was near downtown LA and had that perfect exposed brick look that I was looking for Lucy's apartment, as well as staging it for one of the other client scenes and acting as essentially the living room for Lucy's apartment when they have the scenes with the family. The only downside to the Van Nuys location was it was very close to the Van Nuys airport, meaning that every so often we would have to stop since a plane would go overhead and we'd have to hold for sound. So my recommendation would be to make sure to vet a location for sound, since you end up losing minutes or even hours throughout your shooting day and probably even miss a lot of takes and setups that you ultimately want to get. In the industrial style loft, we were able to section and partition off different sections and almost make it feel like it had more rooms in it than it actually did. And in that way, we were able to kind of create a little more of a conventional apartment than it actually was, since it was a very open floor plan. For the scene of Kylie at the very beginning of the film, we actually shot that in the loft as well. We just designed it and created our own canopy bed in there. I love that you would never really know that it's the same location as Lucy's bedroom when you watch the final film. This location was great because it also had a freight style elevator for loading equipment in. The noise wasn't too much of an issue, and we really were able to spread out our gear since there was a lot more space around the areas than where we were shooting. The space also had tall enough ceilings since we had a JL Fisher crane, and we had a lot of shots where we were very high up with the camera looking down on the bed for a bird's eye view shot. I will also put a link in the description below for Jess's initial sketches and production design ideas for all of the different client bedrooms within the film. The great part about using Peerspace or Gigster is that they often have built-in permit and insurance needs that you don't have to go outside of when you're booking your locations through those hosting websites. Otherwise, you end up having to add nearly $1,000 to your budget just to source an external permit for shooting. Once we had agreed on the locations and knew they were right for the shoot, we pulled the trigger, we booked them for the specific dates, and that allowed a lot of the other parts of production to really fall into place so much more easily. The best part about locking our locations was now we could build out a shooting schedule, we could figure out the load-in situation, the lighting plan, the grip and electric needs, and essentially every other part of the logistics for the shoot. We were also able to break down the shooting schedule by scene, location, and actor. Now it was time to build the crack team to pull it off. Part 8, assembling the crew. The best part about living in Los Angeles is there is an overabundance of crew. Due to the nature of the script, there was no visual effects or stunts that were needed, which meant that we didn't really have to source any specialty department heads for the production. This also kept our production cheaper since we didn't have to account for any green screens or clean plates for visual effects or stunts or even the rigging for that. We really were able to just focus on telling the best story with the standard department heads. The main specialty role we did need for this was a studio teacher, since anytime you're working with a minor on set under the age of 18, you need a studio teacher in addition to at least one parent to supervise at all times. In addition, for one of the shoot days, we had Jean Franzblau on set, who was our intimacy coordinator, but also she was our resident professional cuddling expert to help us choreograph the cuddling client scenes as accurately as possible. Once we figured out what crew needs we had, we calculated about how much budget we had for each crew member and how much money we had to pay them per day. The next step was to source the crew, and usually the easiest way is to start with your department heads and allow them to pick the people that they like to work with. The nice part was Jess and Brennan, 2 of our department heads, were able to fill out a lot of the crew with a lot of people that they had already worked with before. Brennan was able to source the entire grip and electric crew and also found a really good deal on a gaffer who had his own production truck. The rest of the crew was mostly sourced through word of mouth, asking around, emails, texts, Instagram messages, and essentially finding people that other people often recommended for the job. Typically with all the crew, if they were recommended to me by someone else, I would jump on the phone with them and give them a rundown of the project, why it was important to me, give them a sense of the scale of it, and then also ask them about themselves and get a feel for how they were, since I really wanted to see if they would bring a good energy and expertise to the set or not. If all seemed good to go, I would often negotiate the rate with them right there, and if they were good for it, we would bring them on. A true passion, knowledge, and vision for the film, I feel like is absolutely essential as a director when you're first starting to source your crew, since they really need to see that you have a vision for this and care about it as much as they should to be on the project as a crew member. Especially if you're working with a small budget, this passion can sometimes be the thing that helps convince a crew member to come on for a little less than they would normally make. Usually when negotiating rates, I'll offer out what we have in the budget at the absolute max. Sometimes it's one of those things where you say exactly what you have and they're not going to budge, which is no harm, no foul. But if so, it's probably time for you to look elsewhere as a producer. In the best case scenario, the person for the job ends up being a fantastic collaborator, and then there's somebody you could add to your running go-to crew list that you can use for your next production. This also really helps the process move so much faster on subsequent shoots when you start to source the crew. We created a spreadsheet of all the crew members, contact info, and their roles for this production. I'll share that with you below with contact info hidden in case you just want to see some of the awesome people we used on this production. I also really want to take a moment to emphasize how truly important every role on a film crew is. Every single person's job truly matters. I really believe that film crews deserve so much more credit in the public eye, especially for how hard they work. So I really want to thank every single person who worked on the cast and crew for Cuddle Buddies. Part 9, hair and makeup purchases. Another one of my favorite parts of pre-production was working with Tiffy, our hair and makeup person, to pick out the wardrobe choices, the hairstyle, the makeup, and all the accessories for all the characters that appear in the film. It became a fun game to mix and match different accessories for the characters, and again, this is where Pinterest really came in handy. A lot of the accessories that the characters ended up sporting in the film, a lot of it came down to accessories that a lot of my friends were sporting at that time. Things like septum piercings, tattoo styles, hairstyles. A lot of those things really influenced me at the time when I was writing and ultimately made their way into the film on the accessories of the characters. Much like the writing phase where you're basing small parts of different characters off yourself or people that you know, I took the same approach with the accessories and the personal style of each character in the film. Part 10, equipment rentals. The way that I met Brennan, our DP, was when we used to work together at the Panavision camera rental house, and we ultimately were able to test a lot of different lens styles and configurations when we were there, since the very genesis of the film started on that prep floor at Panavision Hollywood, talking about different ideas of something that we would want to shoot together. From the start, I always knew that I wanted this film to feel very intimate visually, which meant a lot of close-ups, really focusing on the skin and the texture, and making us feel like, as an audience member, we are inside those cuddle sessions when they're happening. We really wanted to push the macro close-ups and sell the idea that cuddling feels so warm, and the color temperature and the different tones would also feel very warm with the different lens style and the lighting styles that we employed on the shoot. This also meant using different diffusion filters in front of the lens, different ways to soften the skin and make everything feel just that much more soft and warm and inviting. Another major help was that our second AC on the project, named Noah Griffin, was very kind in allowing us to use one of their Panavision camera and packages that you get as an employee for this shoot, which meant that we were able to get our entire camera package with some of the best lenses in camera totally for free. We ended up using the Panavision Super Speed set, which is a standard spherical lens set and looks absolutely gorgeous. And we also used the Alexa Classic and shot in 2K resolution, along with using the Prime Compact Zoom, which is a 19-90 zoom that Panavision carries, for one shot that included a very specific zoom shot. For our camera department, we still did have to rent a JL Fisher jib, which is essentially a camera crane, and we also had to rent a doorway dolly, which is a type of dolly that allowed us to pull off a very specific shot, which we will also cover more of in the production section. Now that we had our shoot days locked, we were able to book our camera package along with every other rental piece that we needed. The day before the shoot, I grabbed a U-Haul van and did all those pickups myself to save money, though in hindsight, I would highly recommend hiring a production assistant or someone who can go pick up that gear, since as a director, the last thing you want to do is pick up gear when you should be focusing on the creative aspects, especially the day before your very first day of production. At this point, we were ready for the shoot. Part 11, cast details. Since we were a SAG production under the SPA agreement, it was very important that each actor had an Exhibit G or a time card filled out. That way, all of their work hours were adequately documented, that we could submit in a package back to SAG itself. Thankfully, since I was focused on directing, AJ handled all the SAG paperwork for all of the actors on the actual shoot days. Part of the reason this is important is SAG needs the documents no later than a week after your last day of shooting, but also we had to submit all this information to the payroll company as well, but also to make sure they accurately paid all of our actors. The other thing you need if you're working with a child on set is a permit to employ a minor. To get that, you also need workers' comp on your production. Thankfully, the payroll company provided our workers' comp that we used to pay the actors, and in turn, we were able to submit the workers' comp to the labor office in Van Nuys to submit with the application to employ a minor, and then ultimately picked that up from the Van Nuys labor office a few days before the shoot. One of the word of mouth recommendations we got was our studio teacher, which we sourced through a management company called Stella Pacific Management, who sent us an awesome studio teacher for Lorelei, and it turned out to be a great experience. Again, using the SAG micro budget project agreement that exists now completely streamlines a lot of what we had to do for our production. Part 12, last minute details. The very last week of pre-production really included ironing out the most minute details, such as very minor script revisions, dialogue additions, and things like that. Basically any story revisions that didn't have any drastic story changes. We didn't want to impact all of the logistics that we already had set in place. AJ also recommended a great craft service person named Sean Turtle, who ended up bringing some great food to the set and kept our crew fed and happy. Everything was now in place and ready for our first day of the shoot. In the week leading up to the shoot, we also built and finalized our shooting schedule and got everything ready to go to roll the first frame. In conclusion, the two essential ingredients of pre-production are preparedness and adaptability. To recap, the major steps of pre-production are as follows. 1. Development of creative ideas. 2. Create a lookbook. 3. Break down your script and create a budget. 4. Crowdsource fundraising. 5. Start pre-production. 6. Cast your film. Part 7. Pick locations. 8. Assemble the crew. 9. Hair and makeup purchases. 10. Secure any equipment rentals. 11. Cast details and working with SAG. 12. Last minute details. Every week, I'll recommend something that really inspired me from the past week and why. I just finished watching the docuseries Quiet on Set, which is also streaming on Max. Quiet on Set details a lot of the horrific treatment and toxic culture that a lot of the shows that Nickelodeon produced in the late 90s and early 2000s really had on the children, especially the children actors and their families, and how much the authority figures really failed the children in those settings. My hope is that by more of these documentaries getting made, it really does change the culture and sometimes the harassment and abuse that is so pervasive sometimes in the film industry, especially on set, especially around a lot of these major film and TV shows. The docuseries is extremely well done, and I found myself at times extremely angry. I found myself at times heartbroken and even crying, and I think it's so important that we do talk about these topics in our industry. I'd love to hear any recs of any kind that any of you will have, so hit me with yours. All right. So that concludes our second video in the series on pre-production. Leave a comment below if you have any more questions, if you have any thoughts, if you do pre-production differently, I want to hear. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you next week where we cover the third part in this case study series on the making of my short film Cuddle Buddies. Next week we'll cover production, so I'll see you then.